Okay, Imi. So
Hi.
how's it going?
Good. Thank you. Good to be here.
No problem. Yes, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, so how would you describe a parent that's very defensive?
Okay, we're diving right in.
Absolutely.
Let me think. Well, obviously, everyone is very different, and I guess I can describe some general traits, but I don't want people to think it's more like a caricature. Sometimes it's more just that we artificially create these archetypes to understand the concept, but
Hmm.
it's not like it encapsulates the whole person. So when I say a defensive parent, take it as an imaginary archetype rather than a specific person. It's probably someone who's likely to struggle to receive any feedback. And because we're talking in the context of parenthood, they probably struggle to receive any feedback from their child, no matter how they are presented or well intentioned they are. Perhaps they are quite emotionally thin skinned, maybe very likely due to their own unresolved trauma or their past, maybe even
Hmm.
ingrained personality patterns and insecurities. And
Hmm.
so any kind of things may be very quickly perceived as a criticism, no matter how small, or sometimes even the child might be expressing that they are not very happy about something or they're struggling with something, and but because of how defensive they are or how sensitive they are, something even as simple as, oh, mom, I feel hurt when you said that, like something delivered very deliberately in a very healthy way, could still be misconstrued. It can still trigger an immediate reaction. Their walls go up. They may walk away. They may give you the cold shoulder. They may find ways to punish you or guilt trip you by saying things like, oh, I've done all these things for you. How dare you? So all these are possible.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Got
it's
it.
not
Okay,
always
yeah. Hmm.
obvious. Mm.
Hmm. Got it. Okay, yeah. So it seems like the whole like the main idea here is that they struggle to take any feedback, right? If they feel, yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm agreeing with you. Exactly.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So you mentioned that like a main reason for this is like past trauma, just like certain things that have happened in their life that have led them to like become like this, right? So
Mm.
what would those life like life events be like? What happened in their life for them to eventually become a parent that's extremely defensive?
This is a really tricky question because
Hmm.
many different routes could lead to the same protective mechanism. In psychology, we call them defenses, but I think we can think of them as survival or protective mechanisms too. Well, I
Hmm.
would caveat to say if you have been a child of a very defensive parent all your life, we need to say that understanding the origin of it doesn't actually excuse it, because I do think it's a child's tendency to keep going down the rabbit hole of over sympathizing to the point where they bypass their own suffering. So no, it doesn't excuse their behavior. You still have the right to be angry, but maybe having an
Hmm.
understanding of it could help. I think again, okay, I have to stop putting so many caveats in, but
No,
very
it's
like
fine, it's fine, it's great.
because everyone is so different. I don't want to
Yeah.
make it, but then
Hmm.
I think in these podcasts and when you write anything, in order to make a point, there's inevitably some kind of generalization. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
think it's
for
very
sure.
often a shame response.
Yeah.
They may never really have the opportunity to learn or even the psychological resources to learn how to confront their own pain or to say, okay, I'm not perfect, but I am okay. I think, therefore, the slightest potential perceived criticism would push them into the place of shame. And when people are in the place of shame, they react. And that's when you see their wall gets up, when they give you the cold shoulder, when they withdraw. There are many,
Hmm.
many formative experiences that could have led to this. Maybe they had a very critical parent who never taught them how to be imperfect and okay. Maybe they grew up in a family where vulnerability is a weakness. Maybe they were simply neglected. Maybe no one had punished them explicitly or hit them, but they were just neglected. So they had to raise themselves. And, that would create a kind of extreme perfectionism as well when you don't have the guidance and you just have to find your way. These are all very complicated and all of them is a whole book in itself. But I
Hmm.
do think it's quite likely that they never really learned how to deal with shame, or they were overly criticized themselves, and now they're replicating their own trauma with their children. Yeah.
Got it.
So they
Yeah.
don't
Okay.
know
So,
how to integrate their shadow, if I were to say, to
yeah,
sum it up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So it seems like, again, like the main idea behind it, obviously, each person is going to be different, but the main idea is like it's a shame response, right? So
I don't know if it's
mhm,
my internet or yours, but you
yeah,
are bleeping out.
I'm bleeping out. That's completely fine. I'm not sure why it does that on the other end, but like right now it's going fine. Like it's going smooth.
Yeah,
You
you're
can hear me though, right?
frozen. Yeah, I can hear you, but you're frozen a bit. Oh,
Oh,
you're
really?
moving again. That's good. That's good.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fine. It's fine because like like it's going smooth right now, so like no problem at all. It's yeah, I'm
Sure,
not sure why it
sure.
does that, but
It's okay.
yeah. So it
Technology.
seems like yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so pretty much as you mentioned, like the whole main point comes down to like it's a shame response, right? In some way, shape, or form. Obviously, that gets built in many ways from being neglected, from being shamed for being vulnerable, or having a parent that may have constantly been verbally abusive. There's so many different things that could have led to that, right? Now,
Yeah.
one of the common uh, forms of behavior when it comes down to people that are extremely defensive is what you call splitting,
Oh.
right? So, can you go a bit deeper on that, and how does that contribute to the behavior of a person slash parent that's extremely defensive?
Yeah, I can. It's actually very much ties into what I already said. So just go to roll it back. Splitting itself, it's a primitive psychological defense in psychoanalysis. They call it primitive. Doesn't mean anything bad. It's just there are levels. It's a bit of a jargon, the primitive, secondary, but
Yeah.
basically it's something that's quite common amongst young children. So when we were very, very little, our brain doesn't have a lot of capacity. So we have to think in black and white terms. You see this in children a lot. When you were given a
Hmm.
cookie, you go, "Oh my god, this is the best person in the world." And then when your parents
Yeah.
punish
Yeah.
you, suddenly you lose all perspective, and "I hate you, you're the worst." And that's
Hmm.
natural for a child, because that's their brain only have the capacity to think in black or white, so they can't hold the capacity of, "Oh, my mom loves me, but sometimes they can be horrible," which is a really nuanced, complex thing that adults can do, but children struggle to. So for most of us, when we grow up, we develop that capacity for emotional maturity. We learn that people are multifaceted. We lose it sometimes. When we argue with our partners or something, we sometimes lose perspective. But by and large, we can hold complexity. We can hold
Hmm.
something called object constancy, meaning, we have this psychological skill to say, okay, right now it feels horrible and I really do not like this person in front of me, but I still remember all the times we have together. So anyway, going back to defensive parents, sometimes not that they completely don't have it, but they are more likely to flip into a splitting mode where they go back to, again, get stuck in this early black and white way of thinking when it comes to both when they see others and when it comes to their self-image. So why does that relate to their defensive response is, for instance, when they perceive something to be, like we talked about feedback, right? If they feel like, oh, there's something that I'm doing badly as a parent, that is a proper that is a proper crisis for them. Their brain may
Hmm.
catastrophize. They may interpret even the smallest concern as, "Oh my God, I'm a terrible parent. I'm all bad." And they can't sit with that. It's too much. The shame is too much. They drown. So to protect themselves, to stop themselves from disintegrating, they have to defend and deny it, and maybe even punish you, the messenger who's saying they are not perfect.
Hmm.
Like to illustrate, if you were in an ideal scenario, if you were very, very mature, you may say, "Okay, I'm not a perfect parent. I can make mistake as a parent sometimes, as we all do, but that doesn't define me. I'm still a good person. I still can do in a non-defensive way." And if you can do that,
Hmm.
actually, you can say, "Oh, you know what, little daughter, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lashed out at you. Mommy screwed up there today." But
Uh-huh.
it's quite interesting. It is because you can tolerate it's because you can tolerate a mistake. Could you apologize for it and not be defensive? If you can't tolerate it, your only option
Hmm.
in your mind is to deny it, and that creates defensiveness.
Got
Makes
it. Okay,
sense?
yeah. So, yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So it's like black and white thinking, right? So
Yeah,
like
basically black and
it
white thinking
yeah, so it's like
in
you're
this
either good or
context.
you're bad. Yeah, yeah, in this context. Yeah, so like they can't see those small nuances that, like as human beings, you're going to have flaws. You know what I mean? Like that's
Mm,
just how human beings are, right? So I guess it's
mm.
like they can't see that aspect, right? For them, I guess if there's a slight indication that they might have a flaw or they may have made a mistake, it's like, "Oh my god, I'm a bad person." And then immediately they kind of like shut down, right?
And so there are really
Mhm.
two sides to it. So one is that when it comes to their self-image, they split. It also
Yeah.
applies to other people, where suddenly your beloved daughter becomes or son becomes your
Uh-huh.
enemy.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, again, I'm not saying globally and all the time, but when they are dysregulated, this person is like their worst enemy. So they may lash out and treat you in very horrible and cruel way, which they may later regret.
Mm.
But at that moment, you are this all bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
They just basically
Now,
lose the
mhm.
capacity for nuances in a nutshell.
Yeah. Now, is there any way for them to learn this after, obviously they've become a fully formed adult? Is there any way to learn this, or is it
Absolutely.
difficult?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's what people go to
Okay.
therapy for, right? It does take time
Yeah.
when it is such an ingrained mechanism, but yeah, absolutely. There are ways to rewire your brain. Nowadays we talk a lot about neuroplasticity, where a lot of things can change, and I certainly see it changing.
Yeah. So, would you be able to give, just maybe a few techniques or a few ways that people can approach this if they see it in themselves, and I guess have the
Mm.
self awareness to kind of try and get better, right? Because I guess no one wants to be bad, right? So,
Technique is tricky. I mean, I'm usually
mhm.
with the word technique because it also
Technique.
almost
Yeah.
suggests that, with one or two technique you can fix it, when actually, at least in the work that I believe in, it's a much more nuanced, long and complex relational process. Like for example, I
Hmm.
have my own little primitive defense. I probably when I was younger do splitting as well. And personally, I heal through having a long-term relationship with a trusted therapist.
Hmm.
But I understand not everyone wants to do that or have the resources to do that. So when you say technique, well, maybe self-awareness, So, like I said earlier, unless you are very, very stuck to the point, I mean, honestly, if someone is so stuck in black and white thinking that it is
Hmm.
95% of their life, to the point where their life is completely dysfunctional and it affects all aspects of their lives, from career to friends to work to everything, then they probably have a mental disorder according to the clinical definition, and that is probably more serious. But if you are talking about a milder form where you catch yourself with this sometimes, you do come out of it, right? So when you do, reflect on it, journal about it, and say, okay, let me reflect on what happened today, what happened before I lash out, what happened during it, and how did I react, and don't do it in the heat of the moment, but afterwards, and take stock, and then
Hmm.
find ways to create a gap next time between the trigger and your reaction. People use mindfulness techniques a lot. Again, I'm not going to go into detail because I'm sure you have better people to interview on specifically that. But I think the principle here is to find any way you can to create a small, tiny little gap between when someone says something or when you perceive something and your immediate reaction. And then
Hmm.
almost give yourself some prompts or set phrases to just tie you over that emotional storm until you regain your calm and footing again. It's really a
Hmm.
process of self-reflection, and there are different ways to do it. You can obviously find a coach to talk to, or a therapist, or you can journal about it. These are just, yeah, some basic ways.
God. Okay, yeah. So like documented self-reflection, it should help you become more aware of like, okay, what your tendencies might be, why you react in certain situations. And then with that awareness, like as you mentioned, you can use techniques like mindfulness and stuff like that to try and create a small gap between,
Yeah, yeah.
that feeling and your like massive emotional outburst.
Mm.
Right. And then the more you work on that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you feel safe enough to do so, because if as a parent you're already plagued with a lot of shame, then maybe going back
Hmm.
into journal about what happened would feel quite
Yeah.
torturous. It's very easily you get into the shame bubble.
Hmm.
So if
Yeah.
if that is the case, I would roll it back even further to work on creating an emotional safe place, to just start with the shame. And if it is really too hard, find some external help or containing space rather than doing it all on your own. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So, speaking of like, small nuances, right? One thing
Mm-hmm.
that you talk about is narcissistic personality disorder versus narcissistic vulnerability, right?
Right.
So this is a nuance that many people don't really make, right? So can you go a bit more deeper on that and then just explain like the real difference between those two and how it applies to defensive parents?
Hmm. I can't even remember what I wrote. So you asked about NPD, the disorder itself, and what? And
Yeah,
the
versus narcissistic vulnerability.
okay. So
Yeah.
it's let me think. Okay, so it's important because when people say it's such an overused word in especially in social media these days, when people hear
Yeah.
narcissistic they immediately think of someone really grandiose, deliberately cruel, and they may have certain, I'm not going to name anyone, but figures in their head from the media or in the public space. Well, now
Hmm.
full-blown NPD, the clinical diagnosis, it's actually not that common. It is it for it to be a personality disorder, it needs to be a pervasive pattern of grandiosity and lack of empathy in almost all aspects of their lives.
Hmm.
Narcissistic vulnerability, that's different. That's way more common. In fact, it's something we all have to a degree. It's
Yeah.
essentially the fragile, wounded core that lies beneath all those defensive behavior. It's a shame. It's an unconscious sense of inadequacy, shame, fear that they're trying to protect.
Hmm.
So underneath all those defensive behavior is basically a very insecure person who feels fundamentally flawed and unloved, and so the
Hmm.
the reaction are more like an armor to protect this vulnerability. So I think with a lot of defensive parents, when we say narcissistic vulnerability, it's less the kind of stereotypical I'm amazing and you worship me and I'm narcissistic in that way. It's more like deep down, I'm so afraid that I am not good enough that I can't tolerate the suggestion that I may have flaws. So they probably have a more fragile and unstable sense of self-worth. Well, to be fair, I think deep down, even beneath the "I'm amazing, you should worship me" is the same kind of vulnerability. But I think for
Hmm.
defensive parents, it's a little more to the surface where the shame is there. So therefore, to them, everything feels like a massive attack.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So it just seems like so there's a pretty big difference, like between just having a fragile self-image and being a full-on narcissist. To the point where it's like an actual, psychological problem that you have to get help for. It's just again, it comes down to just fragile self-image, which was cultivated, very likely in their childhood, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it.
It is often that when their
Hmm.
authentic self wasn't mirrored to them, that was, oh my God, that all those things you get as a
Yeah.
child or accepted, or maybe they were only valued when they achieve things, when they do things for others. These would all plant the seeds for that. And so these days, you
Hmm.
probably sense that they constantly need the validation that they're good parents. This could be
Got
why they
it.
always bring up all
Hmm.
the sacrifice they made, all the good things they've done, and blame you for not appreciating them because they really desperately need the proof, the confirmation that they've done enough. They're good. They're good. Yeah.
Got it.
It's almost
Yeah.
like they're trying to convince themselves, but they really need to hear it from you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So if someone is in this kind of a situation, right? If their
Mm.
parents are quite defensive and they don't have the means yet to be independent, like how would you tell them to navigate through that situation? It's hard, but like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are degrees to it, but
Hmm.
my heart really does go out to people, young
Yeah.
person. It is a bit like living in a war zone. I mean, you can set up emotional boundaries, but there are degrees.
Mm-hmm.
There are limitations to that. So survival strategies, it's not about fixing them. I think there's one thing that we need to say, it's very important. It's not about changing your parents. It's just about protecting yourself until you can create even more distance. Your safety
Mm-hmm.
comes first. If you are in a situation where you can't leave, then at least keep yourself psychologically safe. Perhaps by there are many. It depends what you're really struggling with, but let me think. Well, not buying into the shaming. Defensive parents may try to make you feel like everything is your fault because everything comes back and there's never any room for you to express anything. Whilst that's hard, try not to take your emotional reality as the actual reality.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and for emotional survival, see if you can be more of an observer. So rather than being very personally in the warfare of it, quote unquote, try to be an observer of your parents' behavior, like, oh, like an anthropologist almost. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so here are what would trigger this person. Oh, so how should one manage the space with them? And almost be very matter of fact and documentary like, okay, what kind of topic usually set them off? And maybe even make notes about it, almost create an operational
Mm-hmm.
menu for it. Like, okay, I know that these are no-goes. I can't talk to them about this and this and this. Or like, oh, on these and these days, they are the most reactive. And so be a bit of an objective observer to it. You can also learn how to do this strategic grayscaling, like learning to be not very invested, not in a passive, well, maybe a bit, but not super passive aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
Just be like a bit more withdrawn and take a step back. And it's not because that is your default reaction to everything. It's just because if someone has left you with no choice, distancing might be your only option. So maybe in order to not escalate a drama or an argument, just give a very short answer. I think on a deeper level, it is, again, I suddenly jump quite quickly from the survival tactics and the interaction to what you
Mm-hmm.
do internally. I think internally that's more important, which is to grieve. Quite honestly, I think I can't
Yeah.
give you a manual of how to talk to your parents because you would be an expert in that, and all parents are different. But
Mm-hmm.
for your heart, what you need to do, I say you to the person who have a
Yeah.
defensive parents, is to grieve. Grieve the parents you want but can't have. Grieve the parents that you ideally would like. Grieve the parents that you see in other families and imagine that they are wonderful and you don't have that. Grieve the childhood that you feel you want but are
Mm-hmm.
not having. And if you can do that and you can reconcile with the idea that, okay, this is my parents and because of their limitations, this is the way they are and these are the conflicts that we have, then the what to do is easy. Yeah. You know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's because
Got
often we
it. Mm-hmm.
escalate an argument because we keep wanting from the parent what you feel you deserve. Like you go on and on with an argument because you really want them to apologize. You want them to be reasonable. You want them to talk to you with logic, and they just can't. And they're not always in the emotional space to do that. And the more you try, the more you push, the worse it gets. But why would you push? You push because you haven't grieved it. You haven't accepted that this is the case. You still
Yeah.
try. You still want to get the parents you want. You still want to have a parent who's reasonable and
Mm-hmm.
not defensive, basically. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, you mentioned like obviously don't try to fix them, for the reasons
Yeah.
that we just spoke about. It's going to feel like an attack, right? Which is obviously not going to get anywhere. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just an ongoing loop. I think trying to change anyone is never wise. You can be
Yeah.
supportive and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but trying to change, especially trying to change their response, trying to change the way they are, trying to micromanage how they react to things you say, that's gonna make you feel hurt. It's not that it's
Mm-hmm.
morally right or wrong, it's that it's not productive. It's not gonna get you very far.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also mentioned, obviously if you're kind of stuck in that situation one of the best things to do is just to not like pretty much like don't attach your self-image to their words, right? Like don't,
Yes,
I guess, take
you
it too
put it better
personally.
than I did. Exactly.
Yeah, but no, because that's important, right? Because so many people, like, obviously as kids, like your parents are like gods, you know what I mean? Like you value everything, that every like, facial expression, everything is like, deeply internalized, right? So the more that you can kind
Exactly.
of move away from, pretty much what you spoke about, like just don't attach your self-image to their words, and then be more observational, right? To see like how
Absolutely.
things are working, how they react. And again, I guess for you, the more healthy habit to really do is to get into the process of like grieving, right? Because like when you accept it, now you're not gonna have like this overreaction yourself as well, right? So can you go a bit deeper on how people can do that? Like how can they grieve in a way where they actually accept it? Because it's so hard to do, and oftentimes it takes years on end to actually do that for most people, right? Because in our society, it's like family and parents are like put on a pedestal, right? So no one truly wants to accept it because it makes them feel like they're not living, in accordance with what society is saying. You know what I mean? So like, how do you grieve in a way that's healthy?
Whew. Well, first of all, I want to say, acknowledge that you've said something really important. That is,
Mm-hmm.
what did you say? Not to take their words. And yes, because the very important point is that as children, we just naturally define ourselves based on how we were treated by our parents. That is so very
Yeah.
natural. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
listening to this as an adult, and you reflect on a lot of the more dysfunctional behavioral patterns or relational patterns or even low self-esteem, you may find the root in the fact that you had the defensive parents, and when you were younger, you've internalized a lot of their responses as your self-definition. So just rolling back on that is part of the grieving, or a grieving is a part of that, in painful and important, and it's not a quick fix. So the
Mm-hmm.
grief, to be clear, we're not talking about, I think to some people, even the word grief is a bit jarring and
It's like
confusing, because when
death.
we say
Yeah.
grief, yeah, exactly, we immediately think of a death and a loss. But we're actually talking
Mm-hmm.
about, like I said earlier, grieving the parents you needed, the childhood you deserved but didn't have. It's grieving lost time, lost opportunities, things you can't see, the things that could have been, the might have been, the fantasies. Um, and it's time to grieve when you've tried and nothing changes, and you just catch yourself still hoping that this would be different. Maybe this time they will understand, and deep down it won't. Um, and sometimes you have to rock bottom, like you hit a point where
Mm-hmm.
you feel so much despair about things not changing, because I'm kind of not answering a question because I really want to psychologically prepare the listener that it's not as simple as we're putting it in this 30 minutes conversation. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
right, I'm going to start grieving now. I'm going to have to accept that. And from now on, I'm not going to have false hope. And then you find yourself going back into it 1,000
Yeah.
times. It's very common. I've done it. People have done it through centuries. It is so common because we will catch ourselves having the same conversation in our head, planning and doing all of that. And when we do that and when we fall back into the loop, to have so much compassion. Because we're
Mm-hmm.
grieving someone who's still alive. We're grieving in a relationship that is still alive. And that's a complicated thing that society hasn't really prepared us for. There's no ritual around there. There's no formula around there. We have to do it in our own
Mm-hmm.
ways. And we'll find that emotions come in waves and layers. Like sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're upset, sometimes we feel guilty for feeling angry. So I'm throwing a lot in there, but I think the principle behind is really to be soft and compassionate with yourself, knowing that it's not a one-time event and it would resurface
Mm-hmm.
as things happen and in different life stages. Yeah, it is
Mm-hmm.
a wave. So don't rush it, don't push it, and just to every time you find yourself falling back into it, just say, there it goes again. I may fall back into the same pattern, but I have done a little more grieving this time. So every time you feel a despair, you're grieving, and actually feel almost a productive energy in it, and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm grieving. I am devastated and disappointed, and I'm grieving. I'm grieving a little more. I may have hope again next time and try it again, and then feel
Hmm.
very hurt again. I may, but I am grieving more, and I'm moving forward. So take
Got
it
it.
slow and not expect yourself to do right, grieving tomorrow. From now on, everything is different. I think that can happen
Hmm.
maybe with some people, but I haven't seen it.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess, like as you mentioned, just be compassionate with yourself. Obviously, it's really hard for people to do this, right? Because again, it's your parents at the end of the day, right? And then again, like the whole main idea is to like drop any sort of like expectations that you might have in your fantasy about like what it should be, how it should be. Because again, as you mentioned earlier, like you can't really change people, right? The only people that can really change themselves are themselves. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
have to make that choice. You have to put in the work because no one's going to force you to do anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
Yeah.
not going to happen. And then again, just coming to that acceptance. It's just like, I mean, it is what it is. And again, get help from other people as well to help you go through the process. Each person's going to react differently. Some people need more support. Some people are kind of okay with, doing it in solitude if they're okay with that. But yeah, be compassionate, drop the expectations, and just accept it. I guess I know that sounds kind of blunt, but I guess that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
let's just talk about the people that have gone through this, right? So you mentioned that after you're going through this process, you have to learn to reparent that inner child, right? Who was kind of taught to like suppress their emotions, doubt their own reality, and just like constantly seek external validation, right? So how does a person learn to reparent themselves in this regard?
It's tough because you haven't been shown it.
Yeah.
Well, not completely. You might have been shown it very intermittently, but not enough. So, learning to reparent yourself or learning to basically from zero parent yourself means you may need to find better role models and guidance outside of your real parent. Um, well, maybe start by noticing that you're treating yourself the way your defensive parents has treated you. I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, but we very often internalize all those critical pattern. Like, do you dismiss your own feelings? Do you always tell yourself that you are overreacting? Do you basically suppress yourself and shoot yourself down? Um, yeah, so remember that that's their voice, not yours. Although if it has been very ingrained, it may sound like your own voice. Start very
Hmm.
small, when you feel something, again, pause, slow down, acknowledge it, and sorry, this sounds a bit like ChatGPT these days because they always
Hmm.
they always say, "Oh, you're feeling this," and that's valid in the
Yeah.
sense that you
Yeah.
feel
I
that way.
know.
I
I
know
know.
it's
It's
horrible, isn't
funny.
it? It
Yeah.
always start with
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
well, the reason they do is because I mean there is some
Empathy.
validity to that. Yeah, I know.
Hmm.
Okay, let's not do it the ChatGPT way, but do it in a
Yeah. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
real way. Like really say that to yourself. Okay, this makes sense. I'm not judging myself for this. Not judging myself
Hmm.
for this, and strategically, intentionally surround yourself with people who treat you the way that is different, that you deserve to be treated, and let their care and respect slowly rewire what you expect from interactions. It's slow work, but it's important.
Hmm.
Um, it's going to be challenging. It's a bit like learning a new language, teaching yourself a new language that you were never taught, but you can certainly learn it as people do. So, yeah,
Hmm.
notice your inner dialogue, practice better new dialogue to replace it, set reminders all around you, and pay attention to your
Hmm.
needs if your needs were not attended to, the ones that you're trying to suppress, trying to push through, you know, could be physical, could be emotional. Maybe you are used to pushing through even when you need rest, not celebrating small wins. I mean, very often people find it helpful to imagine what you would do to a lovely child or your pet. Any I say small creatures or figure, but it could be anything. It doesn't have to be small. It could be how you would treat your
Hmm.
loving partner. Yeah. Something people find powerful, but I think could be triggering is to visualize your inner child.
Hmm.
If you find you're using yourself a bit triggering and not easy, picture again someone you love, but picture yourself as at an age where you really needed support, and ask yourself, what does that child needed to hear? What do they need to feel? and imagine
Hmm.
giving them that, even create a mental picture or do some visualization. What they have found to be quite interesting is when you give yourself an imaginary exercise. That's why therapists sometimes do this, and they lead you down a visualization of, oh, talking to your inner child, giving them an embrace and imagine receiving it. That could be
Hmm.
powerful because your brain doesn't actually know the difference. Like your brain actually would believe that it has actually happened. So that is why it is actually effective in rewiring your experience. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So pretty much, as you mentioned, it comes down to like looking at your main tendencies and then changing your dialogue that isn't helping you, on the
Mm,
inside, right? And then
mm.
surround yourself with a healthier environment, which again, the more you do that, the more naturally your dialogue changes, right? So like you're not, because like just I guess you know with like osmosis, like you just like automatically start to change because of your environment, right? And then you also talked about visualizing your younger self and giving that kid what it really needed, right? Now something you also mentioned was better role models, right? So when it comes down to a role model, again, for this specific type of a situation, what should you look for, if you're looking for a
Yeah,
healthier role model? Yeah.
that is a really interesting question. Um, Well, I can answer something quite generic, like someone supportive and wouldn't put you down, give you a loving experience. But I am just thinking about more pointedly to the topic that we're talking about, pertinent to the defensive parents. Very often, you see children of defensive parents losing their voice, where they lose the capacity to stand up for their needs. They always feel they're in the wrong. You may see things like, I don't know, not standing up to the superior, or getting bullied in the workplace, being taken advantage of, just not knowing how to fight for their rights or have a voice or to speak up their needs because of the upbringing they had. And so it's actually could be potentially quite useful to find a role model that models these behavior for you. Someone who healthily and reasonably would champion you to re-own your voice and express yourself, and model that in a healthy way. So that is tricky because you're talking about someone potentially have a stronger personality or can be quite assertive. But the trick here is that they are not doing it the way your parents does. So they're doing it in a
Hmm.
healthy, mature way rather than just being very strong in order to get their needs met, if that makes sense. It's more like
Hmm.
a mature way of getting your needs met that could be useful. And another interesting piece may be gender. It depends on the gender role of your parents, and how that may have affected your relate. Because that often does the thing, it's not direct, and that every case is different. But sometimes it's worth reflecting on whether or not the way your parents is affects the way you view or authority figure in the same gender in the world, or your own
Hmm.
relationship to that gender. And when we try and find a role model, you may intentionally find someone who is of the same gender, but then give you a more curative experience this time, if that makes sense. Like,
Got
if you
it.
had a very
Hmm.
violent father stereotypically, all your life, then maybe you really lack the sense of safety around an older male figure. And maybe it could be quite curative if you can find a healthy father figure and give yourself a corrective experience that way.
Hmm. Yeah. The only problem is like that, like you have to be really careful when you do that, right? Because I mean, I guess people that prey on individuals, they look for what you're missing. You know what I'm
Mm,
saying? They look for what you're missing, and then they kind of like try and capitalize on that, right? But
yeah,
that is important though, because you didn't get it, right? So you have to get that healthy dose, from somewhere. Obviously, you can try and do it yourself, but it's like we're humans. We need other people, right? So
yeah.
yeah, as you mentioned, it seems like the most important thing is to find someone that does encourage you to
Mm,
truly be yourself, and then like just fully find a way um to like integrate your personality into life, in like
mm.
whatever way that means for you. Now when it
Authentically,
comes,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Now when it comes down to role models, like does it have to be in person, or can it be through books,
Oh, yeah,
virtual sources, stuff
absolutely.
like that? Hmm.
Virtual sources are great. Virtual sources, historical figures,
Yeah.
online things,
Yeah, historical
all
figures are
sorts,
great. Yeah.
all sorts. Even a cartoon
Hmm.
character, if that helps.
Uh-huh.
It could be really powerful.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I mean, you know, it can be kind of hard sometimes, right, to find someone in person who can kind of meet those standards. But online, like especially nowadays, you have access to pretty much everything, right? Um, Now, if someone does want to find somebody in person outside of, like going to therapy, is there any other place that you would recommend that they go and look for, or is it just, I guess?
No, I really don't have any
Mhm.
generic
Yeah,
recipe. That could be anywhere. You know, you could have met them in an intellectual community, a group that it can
yeah,
be anywhere. But like you said, yes, be careful because sometimes we do have the tendency to fall back into being attracted to the people who would be the worst for us. I mean, it's almost
yeah,
cliche now, but you know, we see this a lot in romantic relationship. We somehow fall back into the same type of people that are not very good for us because of that
yeah,
sense of familiarity. Something about it feels eerily right, or it could even feel like an infatuation or attraction, when actually it is something quite toxic, a trauma bond underlying it. So yeah, you're very right to have flagged that up. So no matter where it is, be it secular, religious, or you know, just intellectual. It's not really about the setting, but about how sharp you are in your own radar and self awareness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then again, like that also comes down to experience too, right? Like the more you interact with people, and then I get again, if you have a high level of self awareness, and then again, if you become really comfortable, with that self awareness, it becomes quite easy to kind of figure out who doesn't have the best intentions, when they're dealing with you, right? So like, that's really important
Yeah.
because people fall into that trap all the time, because like that's the number one thing, right? Give someone what they don't need, and then like they become fully dependent on you. That's not the best place to be. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
You learn to spot the red flag earlier, hopefully.
Hmm. God. Yeah. And then as you mentioned, going to like support groups, like there's many of those actually. If you go online, you can find many support groups that can help people again, have guidance if they need be. Right. Okay, Imi. Well, thank you so much. This was a fun episode. It's obviously a really important topic that's quite taboo, I guess, in our society, but it's really
Yes.
important, and I really appreciate what you do because not many people talk about it. So,
Thank you.
if people wanted to go and find your work, where would you go and tell them to go?
It depends what resonates with you. I do have a website that's spelled
Hmm.
eggshelltherapy.com. So eggshell is like the shell of an egg, and then
Yeah,
therapy.com. You can put it somewhere in your thing, I suppose.
yeah.
I,
We'll
I,
put it
I
down below.
appear
I'll put it down
sometimes,
below. Yeah.
yeah, on Medium. I don't do a lot of like broadcasting or anything, but I do interview interesting people sometimes as well on YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've written some books that people might find useful, and you can find me on Amazon. That might be a good place to start if you don't mind investing in a book. Yeah, I just, I want people to know this is not about parents bashing because being parents is really,
Hmm.
really difficult, really, really
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, and we're also
very
not
difficult.
about
Yeah.
trying to get you stuck in blame. It's just more about understanding what happened. Yes, it is a taboo subject, and therefore we talk about it. It's okay to say, my parents have tried their best, but there are things I didn't get, and here I am as a grown adult. I'm taking responsibility to heal myself and to be honest with what
Hmm.
happened with me. There might be some anger and blaming in the process, but that's not ultimately the goal or the thing or what we perpetually what we keep doing. It's not about that. Yeah,
God, yeah, no problem. I will link all of that down below, and people can definitely, again, go and check it out if need be.
sure. Yeah, thank you for all that you
Okay.
do as
All
well.
right.
Good luck.
No problem. No problem. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate this.